Hi, my name is Gavin Lees and welcome to this on-demand session for getting started with vRealize automation. Today, I'll be giving a brief introduction, talk about how we constructed the lab, before giving a brief overview of the lab experience, followed by a demo of the Getting Started with vRealize automation hands-on lab. So a little bit about myself. My name is Gavin Lees. I'm a lead solution engineer based in the UK. As a lab captain, I created this Getting Started with vRealize automations lab, installing and configuring the environment that is used, as well as writing the manual used to guide you through each module. As a solutions engineer, I've helped many customers build and manage their private and public clouds using vRealize automation, guiding them through initial implementation, building their first cloud templates, to deploying and managing thousands of workloads. I've been involved in a number of internal betas, taking my experiences from working within the field and feeding them back to the product management and engineering teams. In order to construct the lab, as a lab captain, the first thing I do is build a storyboard. And this lays out the modules and defines the content to achieve the module objectives. We then start to construct the vPod, and the vPod becomes the template that is deployed for each hands-on lab environment. Each person taking a lab gets their own copy of that environment to work on during the hands-on lab session. As we create a vPod environment to support multiple labs, the lab captains need to work together in order to ensure changes they make are not impacting other labs. And whilst the lab environment is being created, each lab captain is also very busy writing the lab manual, creating the modules based on the storyboard they created earlier. Once this is complete, there are a number of stages to test and review the lab before marking it as ready for release. The vPods are created using vCloud Director, and here we can construct the required networks and install virtual machines. The environment consists of layer 1 and layer 2 virtual machines. Layer 1 machines are running directly on ESXi physical hosts, and the layer 2 virtual machines are running on ESXi virtual hosts. The vPod that this lab runs on consists of 13 layer 1 VMs, 14 nested VMs, and in combination, they utilize 57 vCPUs, a total of 270 gigabytes of memory with 160 gigabytes of disk space. The vPods can be deployed across any one of 5 different clouds. So before I jump into the demo of the lab, let's talk about what I'll be covering. Modules typically take between 15 and 60 minutes to complete, so don't expect to complete the entire lab in one sitting. It's possible to take modules in any order you like, and you can even skip modules as you don't need to complete a module to move on to the next one. Today, I'll dive right into module 1, quickly demonstrating the capabilities and the value of the service catalog. I'm not going to spend too much time here, so that we can spend most of our time in module 3, which is where we'll take a look at how we create and work with cloud templates. So let's just switch across to the lab. And here you see that I've already got the lab started, but if you do want to enroll on this lab, you can quickly search for HOL-2201-02, and that will find you the Getting Started with vRealize automation lab that we've got here. So as you see on the right here, we have the lab manual, and we can flick through the lab manual using the left and right arrows here. But we can also, if we want to jump to a particular module, we can also click to the table of contents, and we can select the module that we would like to begin. And you see that that takes us right there. If you also look in the table of contents, there also is an appendix. And so if you're not familiar with the hands-on lab interface, then you can flick through here, and it will explain a few more areas about how to use this lab manual, how to specifically copy and paste text into the lab environment. But I'll show you that as we work through there. So as I said, on the right we have the manual, and on the left here we have a virtual desktop, and this is very much a jump box so that we can access the lab environment. We've got lots of options to move these items around. So we can actually shift the manual onto the left if that's something you prefer, or we can also create a floating window and move that around here. But just for my sake, I like to keep it there on the right. And we can also do lots around the desktop itself. So we can toggle full screen. We can maximize it, and we can exit that maximization. And I'm just going to take the full screen off again. So there's lots of options just to move things around and just get this into a situation where you're comfortable and can read and see everything that you need to see easily. So let's take a look at module 1. So in module 1, we're going to take a look at the self-service catalog. And the self-service catalog is an area where a cloud administrator can publish services from vRealize automation using and importing content from Cloud Assembly cloud templates. So one last thing that we need to double check before we actually get started in our lab is that we need to ensure that the lab status is green and shows ready. And the reason for that is that there are a number of scripts. There is a script that actually goes and checks and ensures that all the services, all the virtual machines for the lab environment have all started and are responding so that everything is in place, ready to begin our lab. If it's not showing ready, then please give it some time and just wait for that to actually come and the status to be ready before you begin starting the lab, because you may get some unexpected results and errors. So let's begin by firing up vRealize automation. So we're going to open a browser, and in this browser, you can see in the bookmark bar, we have got a bookmark for vRealize automation. And so we've got a number of users that we'll be using to work through this environment. One is HOL user. Now, HOL user is just a consumer. So it's just a person who wants to consume services from vRealize automation. The other user that we have is HOL admin. And HOL admin basically has rights to administrate the entire VMware vRealize automation platform. So that includes the cloud configuration, being able to create templates, etc., creating and improving policies. So I'm just going to click sign in here. And you see here, because we are just a standard user who only needs to consume services from vRealize automation, we only have access to the service broker component. So we're going to go ahead and just open the service broker. So if we were a HOL admin user, the service broker is where we can curate and create catalog items. But for our standard user here, all we can really do is request service catalog items and also manage our deployments. And you see here that actually I've got a report on my resource usage. Now that says zero, that's zeroed out, but as we start to deploy things for our HOL user, that will actually start to report on how many VMs we've got, the amount of CPU, storage and memory that we're utilizing. The service catalog here is not particularly big. There are not too many items in here, so it's fairly straightforward to find our items. But actually, if you go to the search bar here, you can see that we can begin to search for items in the catalog. So by typing Azure, we can see that we've got a machine here that says it's an Azure machine, and we can request that. We can also filter on items. So if you look here, we can look for AWS CloudFormation templates, which is another construct catalog item that we can actually service up through this service broker here. We can also create catalog items for the vRealize orchestrator workflow. So if you're familiar with orchestrator workflows, we can also provide access to those for a user to request, as well as things like the marketplace and also code stream pipelines. But in this instance, we are going to request our this Azure machine here. So when we click request, you see that we have a number of items to populate. In this instance, we don't have a great deal here, but in the deployment name, I'm just going to type in my first Azure machine. And there's nothing else left here for me to do. So I'm going to go ahead and click submit. So now we see vRealize automation going off and making a request to deploy this service. Now this service actually has a policy assigned to it. And the policy means that whoever requests this, there needs to be an approval process, and that approval process needs to be approved by an administrator. So we can actually check the progress of my request here by going and clicking on the hyperlink here, My First Azure. And you see that it's currently in progress, but we can click refresh here as well, just to double check on things. We can also click here and we can see the history. As you can see, it's just starting to build up here, and the request is initially has currently been initialized. So just wait a few moments longer, and then we'll see that this request is paused and is actually waiting for approval before it can actually go ahead and actually deploy our Azure machine. And you see now, after a little moment, that we are waiting. The creation process has paused, and an approval is currently pending. And then the only way to actually for this deployment to progress is for our HOL admin, as it says here, to approve the request. So what I'm going to actually do now is I'm going to log in as HOL admin, and the way to do that here, rather than log out, we can actually open an incognito browser window, and we can log on this way. So I'm going to select the domain that the user belongs to, and I'm going to type in HOL admin, password, and log in as our HOL admin. So as you see here, our HOL admin user has access to more services within vRealize automation. So they have access to Cloud Assembly, CodeStream, Orchestrator, SaltStack Config, and the Service Broker. As the approvals are handled by this Service Broker, we'll just go ahead and click on the Service Broker. Now you see here, if you look at the tabs here, you see that the Service Broker HOL admin has access to more things. So again, we see the catalog, and you see that actually they have access to more catalog items than the HOL user. And you'll also see that they've already deployed some resources as well. So you can see some resource consumption. We can view our deployments on the deployment section, and we can also look at content and policies. So this is where we can actually create those policies and content. So you see there are a bunch of content sources from where we are pulling our content from. We can look at content sharing, but also we can look at policy definitions. And here we can see the Azure approval policy. So if I just open that, we'll just take a quick look at what's happening behind the scenes. So as you can see, because this is a demo lab, all we're doing here is we've created a name for our approval policy. We've allocated that to a project, which is HOL project, which is where this template is being deployed from. And we've created some criteria here for the actual policy. So all we've had here is that actually, if the cloud template equals Azure machine, then what we're going to do is we're going to create a user-based approval type, and the approver mode is any, and the approver needs to be admin HOL. So what we are saying here is that this, if the criteria matches the Azure machine, which it does in our case, and HOL admin user will need to approve that. We also have an auto expiry decision. So say the administrator doesn't get round to approving that particular policy, then we can actually trigger an auto expiry after 5 days. And the automatic decision is actually approved, but we could also set that to reject. So I'm just going to come out of here and actually go to the approval request itself. So here you see, this is the request I made from HOL user. So the deployment name that we gave it was My First Azure. And you see that it's pending and we've got that expiry date. So, you know, that's when we know that, you know, the auto decision will take place. And we can see that actually what we're trying to do, what the HOL user is trying to do is that they're trying to create a deployment. And the policy that's being applied is the Azure approval policy, which is, as I just showed you. And we've got the ability to either approve or reject. Now, what I'm going to do for this one is I'm going to reject this. And the reason for this is I'm just going to say not enough detail provided. And I'm just going to click reject. So if I just close this window now and I return, so this is back at our HOL user, and you can see that the create pro is now back in progress, so it's resumed. But what you will see shortly is that the approval was rejected. The deployment is now being deleted, and when you wait a few more seconds, and after a few moments, you'll see that the create approval rejected has appeared. And we also see that HOL admin rejected the request with the reason not enough detail provided. So that's a great way of showing, you know, demonstrating how a user requests a catalog item and walked through the approval. And I just walked you through the approval process and demonstrated how a request could be rejected and feedback provided from an administrator. So now I'm just going to return back to our deployments, and you'll see that we already have some deployments here. So we have HOL Windows and HOL Ubuntu. So I'm going to just open this up and just show you a little bit more about how a user can manage their deployment. So this is a deployment that's been requested previously. So you can see that it consists of a Windows machine. It's got an IP address and it's attached to a VMware-backed network. Now, if we click on the deployment itself, we have a number of actions. We can change the lease. So it's actually possible to have lease policies applied to, to a deployment. And that means that, we can request a deployment and we can put a lease time on there. So, after that lease time has expired, we could either delete the deployment or request that the user ask for an increase on the time that it's taken. We can change ownership of that deployment. So maybe I'm moving on to another project and we need to hand over administration of this deployment to someone else. We can also delete the deployment and we can also power off the deployment. So that's some actions that we can take on the deployment itself, but also we can manage directly the Windows machine. And you see here that we actually have an awful lot more options here. Now, these options, again, can be managed through policies so that we can either restrict or enable policies from an administration point. But as you can see, we can power off, we can reboot the machine, we can add disks, we can connect to the remote console so that we could actually manage and work on that particular machine. And so this is just a great tool for actually day-to-day operations. So, post-deployment, we can actually manage our machine that we've requested without having to return back to IT administrators, asking for them for creating snapshots or backing up a machine, etc. So I'm just going to actually open up and drill down into this machine and just take another look at what's going on here. So in this deployment, you can see that deployment's been successful, and we know that's true because the resources exist. We can see the resource topology. So we can see our Windows machine. And if we click on that Windows machine, we can find out more information. We can look at, machine names, the IP address. We can also look at the network, and we can get some details about the network. We can also look at the history. So we can actually see the deployment history here, but we could actually see any other changes that we may be making. Through the integration of vRealize automation and VROPS, we can actually monitor this machine. And so actually this information is taken directly from VROPS, and you can see the alert status is good. The health status is good. Everything's green, which is great. But we can also look at the performance stats of the machine. Not only that, we can see any alerts that could be inbound. The health is good here, so I'm not expecting to see any alerts. We can also optimize our machine. So using vRops integration, we can actually check if this virtual machine is right sized. And as we can see, the deployment has one oversized VM, and you can see this deployment actually only has one machine in there. But we can see that our Windows machine here is oversized. So actually, if we select this here, we can go ahead and click right size, and vRops and vRealize automation will right size this virtual machine utilizing the recommended settings here. So I'm just going to close that, and we will log out now and move on to module 3, where we'll start to look at our Cloud Assembly templates. We will create a simple Cloud Assembly template, and we'll look at how we can manage and work with those Cloud Assembly templates. So I'm just going to log out here. We do this just by using the drop down, and we will log back in as our HOL admin user. And so in order to work with our cloud templates and create a cloud template, we need to be utilizing Cloud Assembly. And this is where all the management of the vRealize automation platform really takes place. We can click on the Design tab. And if we look at the Design tab, we can create cloud templates. If we go to the Infrastructure, we can start to begin to configure projects, our users, and the VRA platform in general. We can create cloud zones. And you see that this particular environment has a vSphere private cloud. It's also connected to the AWS cloud and an Azure cloud instance. And that enables us to allocate and deploy resources to each of these. We also have an extensibility tab, and this is where we can add additional configuration items. So particularly, we can look for event topics and trigger things like workflows or action-based extensibility. So we create our cloud templates under the Design tab, and I'm just going to go ahead here and I'm going to click New from Blank Canvas. I'm going to give my cloud template a name, which will be my first app. I'm going to allocate it to a project, and I'm going to choose to share only with this project, but we can actually choose to share with other projects within an organization. But in this particular case, we'll just stick with HOL project. We could create. And so this is our starting page, and you see that on the left, we've got lots of objects that we can drag and drop onto our canvas. And you see there's an awful lot in there. We can drag objects to create Kubernetes clusters. We've got some vSphere specific objects, some NSX pieces, AWS, and lots of AWS. We can add configuration management through integrations with Ansible Ansible Tower and Puppet. We've got some Google Cloud Platform objects, and Microsoft Azure objects as well that we can all deploy and configure and manage utilizing vRealize automation. In the middle here, we've got our canvas, and this is where we drag and drop our objects onto to create a application or platform infrastructure. And on the right here, we have our infrastructure as code. So you see here, there's very little YAML code in here, and that's partly because we've got nothing here. Now we've got two options. We can actually write YAML code from scratch, or we can begin to create our cloud template utilizing the objects on the left. And so in order to create our first object, we're going to create a vSphere machine. So we're just going to go ahead and drag and drop that onto our canvas. Now you see immediately that our YAML code has started to populate itself and start to configure some things. But you'll also see here that we have an error. And that is because we need to set some property values to define our object. So if we go ahead and click within image, you'll see that we have a number of items to select. Now, these are pre-configured items in the infrastructure. So we've actually created some image mappings, and these are the image mappings. So go ahead and select Ubuntu 18. But we can also add additional items, and we can actually create constraints. Now let's just click enter here and begin typing constraints. So click enter, and you see that it auto populates, and then drop down, and a lot of information is using tags. So we're actually going to begin typing. So if we select tag here, and then we can see some tags that are available. So we're going to choose compute equals vSphere. And what this tag is going to do is that it's going to ensure that this blueprint is only ever deployed to a vSphere environment. Now, we also want to add a network for our machine. So go ahead and drag a vSphere network object across. So now you see that we've actually added a network type. So we've now got this cloud vSphere network. So there's some additional YAML code in there. And what we want to do here is we also want to add a network constraint to use a vSphere network. So again, we're going to begin typing constraints. It will auto-populate. So we'll click enter, click enter again, and we're going to add the tag. And here we have net vSphere that determines that it's a network, a vSphere backed network. But we also need to connect our machine to that network. And you see here, if you just hover over just very carefully, there is a small circle, and we can drag that to our machine. And that, as you see, will connect our machine up. You see here that we've got some information, so we can just take a quick look at that. And it's just saying we can insert a number of optional parameters. The next thing that we can do is we can add a version. So we're just going to allocate version 1, and we're going to give that we're going to add to the change log, and we're just going to say initial configuration. We're going to click on create. Now, the next thing that we're really going to want to do is that we're going to want to test our cloud template here. And we could just deploy that and just check that everything works as we expected. But one of the things that we can do with vRealize automation is we can test this deployment. So if we go ahead and click test, and we'll wait for the test results to return. So when we get our test results back, we can see that our vSphere network worked correctly and our vSphere machine worked correctly. So we're just going to close that now, and now we can deploy it from here. Now what we could do is actually create this as a catalog instance and deploy it as a catalog item. But as a cloud administrator and a developer of templates, that can be quite cumbersome and take time, just to, extra few steps just to be able to deploy the machine. And what we can actually do is we can deploy right here directly from Cloud Assembly. So we're going to create a new deployment. So we need to give our deployment a name. So my first app. We're going to go with the current draft. As you see, we've only got current draft available. And let's just click deploy. And here we are back on the deployment page. Now, if we click on history, we can start to see the deployment in progress. And you can see that the request is in progress, and vRealize Automation is starting to choose an environment to deploy this machine to. You can see that it's actually now deploying the resources. So after a few minutes, the deployment will have completed, and you should see create successful. Occasionally, you may need to click the refresh button just to make sure that you're getting the right thing. So now we can click on our Cloud vSphere machine. And if we go to Actions, you'll see that we can connect to a remote console. And if we log on to our Ubuntu machine, which we have just deployed, and once we're logged on, let's go ahead and check what the IP address is. And you see here, we've got an IP address of 192.168.100.119. If we return back to our Cloud Assembly page, we'll see that that corresponds with the address that we see here in the console. Now, one of the other things we can do is if we return to our design tab, I'm just going to demonstrate our cloud template iteration. So we're actually going to make some changes to this blueprint and then redeploy the template. So let's first ensure that the cloud machine is selected, and then we can view the properties of that machine. So we can do two things. We can edit properties here in the YAML code itself, or we can edit them under the Properties tab. We're going to click on Show All Properties so that we can see all the properties. And you can see here we've got a count of 1, and we're actually going to edit that field and update it to 2. And immediately you should see on the canvas that we now have the additional stacked boxes rather than a single box. And that is just to replicate that the object count is now greater than 1. So we can now just click test to ensure that we've got the proper syntax. And you can see that the test results have come back successful, which is great. We're now going to create a new version. So you can see that it's already automatically updated the version to version 2, the previous version was 1. And we're just going to put in the changelog here, updated VM count to 2, and click create. So we're going to go ahead and click deploy again. Rather than creating a brand new deployment, we're actually going to update our existing deployment. And we want to update it with the current draft, which is now version 2. And we're going to click my first app deployment. We click next to start progressing through this. And what vRealize Automation does is it actually creates a plan of the changes that it needs to make. and then it will inform us. So here you can see that if we expand the adds, what the changes it's going to make is it's going to add 2 new machines to our existing deployment, and it's going to delete the old machine from the deployment. So let's click deploy to make those changes. So now vRealize automation will start to update our existing deployment and start to make the changes that which it identified in the plan. So we click on history. Again, you can see that we did the initial create, which was our initial deployment. And then it's now updating our deployment. And you see that it's checking for an approval. There's no approval policies on this, so it should skip past that next. So while we're looking at history, we can click on the provisioning diagram. And we can see here the provisioning process and what's currently going on. And one of the interesting things that you will see here is that if you recall when we first created our cloud template at the beginning, we added a constraint on our Ubuntu machine to say that compute vSphere tag was a constraint. And you see that the current project that it's allocated, and because that constraint was set to vSphere, the provisioning process chose not to deploy that to AWS or our Azure regions and continue to create the cloud template on the vSphere environment. We can click dev mode, and this gives us additional information on the stages and the process that was followed by VRA. So I'm just going to close that. And now that you can see our update is complete. So in order to save resources, especially if you do want to continue on to more modules, it's always good to clean up our environment. So we're just going to click delete, and this is going to delete our deployment. So there's no need to wait for this to complete. What we will do now is we'll just take a look at our cloud template again. And this time, let's just go into version history and have a look at the versions that we created. So let's get started by selecting version 2, which was the draft that we just recently deployed. And we can do a differential against version 1 of our cloud template. We want to do a differential against version 1. And we can see that the YAML code has identified that, we have this additional line in our version 2, which is count equals 2, which was the additional compute machines that we added to our version 2 cloud template. And that is omitted from our version 1 cloud template. We can also do a differential to view this visually. And you can see here on the left here, which is our version 2 cloud template, we've got this stacked objects here, and on the left we just have that single box. So this brings this hands-on lab demonstration to a close. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that it's given you a taster to actually want to come back and log on to the Hands-on Lab website and actually have a go at this lab and maybe take some more modules to find out a little bit more. Thank you for your time, and my name's Gavin Lees. Goodbye.